Bruno Carvalho, welcome to Architecture, Design, and Photography. Excited to have you here today to talk about The Invention of the Future, a book you recently authored, I believe.
Yep.
So, I haven't read through the book. I've gone through a summary and come up with a lot of questions, and I'd like to hear a lot more about the book. Future cities, it seems like from looking over the summary, it looks like it could be bleak, but you have a take on it that can maybe give us a little bit more hope. Things like the line, or what was the other one in there? Maldives. Maldives is an interesting one personally because there's a lot of surf there that I know a lot about, but I haven't actually been there. But where's the best place to start in discussion about this issue in general? And I have a few deeper foundational questions that I think will come out in kind of that lay of the land that you might provide.
Yeah, so the book itself starts in the 18th century, kind of with the idea that that's when humans first start to imagine or assume that the future will be radically different from present and past. Right?
It kind of in a way that maybe the cities can go on longer without simply having a wall and crumbling after a while. They have a longer kind of idea of how long the city will stay around.
Yeah, so even the walls are pretty recent, right, in our history as a species, right? So if you
Really?
well, yeah.
So
if you account for
our oldest cities don't have walls like that?
Yeah, but that's just a few thousand years, right? And we've been around as a species for quite a bit longer than that.
A little
right?
bit longer.
So as far as we know, right,
Yeah,
humans
yeah.
before us, you might build. You lived semi-nomadically. You might build for seasons. You might even build for several years. But you're not sort of planning and designing architecture for generations beyond your own, right? And as far as we know, you're certainly not building for posterity, right? So once you start getting stone monuments, temples, and so on, you're designing for posterity. But again, as far as we know, you have a horizon there which is somewhat fixed by the divine, right? So it might be a cyclical world where it sort of ends and restarts, or it might be kind of a linear, there's some kind of salvation at the end, or there's some kind of reckoning. But in the 18th century, that radically changes, right? You start to imagine the future as different within your life or the life of your children and your grandkids. And that's just not, as far as we know, how humans went about.
That's a really interesting take on it that I haven't really, I'm sure a lot of people have that take. But so what happened around that time? Did it come from a spiritual, cultural place that really influenced that future projection of what's to come in their thinking? Was that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think there's many ways to tell that story. One is in the 18th century in Europe, you start to have people that have a different idea of God, right? So it's a God that doesn't really intervene in human affairs, or they might even be, atheists or going in that direction. So they
Trending
really start
a little more deistic rather than
right.
Certainty-based, kind of clear idea, more so a God that set things in motion and stepped back.
That's right, and more right. So more secular, but also more confident in the ability of humans to shape the world and shape their environments. Right.
Okay.
So the book starts with Lisbon, which is an unusual case because the city was destroyed with an earthquake. So it kind of created an opportunity for engineers and designers to basically rebuild the city kind of as a modern place that was not meant to be a religious city, right? So Portugal was an extremely religious country. If you walked around Lisbon before the earthquake, you would sort of bump into churches and they'd be in very prominent places. They rebuilt it as kind of a grid, a city that was kind of thought to withstand another earthquake. So the latest anti-seismic technologies and construction. It's designed for sort of water management, for growth. So very rational, very secular, but also very ambitious, right? With the idea that we actually can do this. We can plan for kind of a human timeline and for progress, and not just to kind of reflect religious values or royal power or
Yeah.
whatever it might have been in the past.
Up to that point, would it be arguable that before you had widespread religion, you had more tribal, peculiar religions between tribes? And when a single religion came in and unified, either Islam within certain regions, Buddhism with certain regions, Hinduism with certain regions, or Christianity with certain regions, that when the religious expansion happened, that it eliminated a lot of things by combining the trust between tribes, eliminating their own personal religions and bringing them all to one more unifying religion, at least in a broader sense than the kind of, from city to city, they worship different gods and fight each other and everything falls apart eventually. So religion brings it to a point where we have something like Lisbon, but then is there like a societal graduation from religion that further allows development, where religion kind of got to a point and then a new form of religion or a more modern form of religion allows for an even larger expansion? It starts to sound kind of like spiral dynamics, if you've heard of that. But is that kind of a accurate take on that, or maybe more of a question to get more accuracy?
Yeah, no, I think both. Definitely lots of questions in there, and many outside of my wheelhouse. I guess what I will say is that the norm until, what I kind of call the invention of the future in the 18th century is that, you design for a world with religious truths that you don't necessarily challenge, right? In a world before our own, right? Like you don't, sacrifice, humans for some god because you believe it will appease them. Like you have to be pretty convinced that's going to happen, right? Mm-hmm. The world, when this book begins, the world of Lisbon, is a very different one. It's a one where people are no longer living in sort of tribal arrangements. To me, that's a condition for modern cities, is living among strangers, right? So for most of our history as a species, we didn't do that. Your future was somewhat assigned at birth, right? You're the son of a cobbler, you're going to be a cobbler. You're the son of the priest, you have sort of you're aristocratic, your future is fixed. If you're a serf, your future's fixed. If you're enslaved, your future's somewhat fixed. There's limits to how different your future might be. In the 18th century, that's a whole different ballgame, right? Lisbon is a city with many, many different religious faiths. It's a city in an empire where there's a good amount of trade happening, sort of lots of languages. It's already a city as kind of a place of encounters. So I think what that does, I think that does many things, but among them, it makes less sense to kind of build for a posterity that's kind of predicated on a future set in stone and shaped by certain religious truths that you really can't step outside of. You know what I mean?
So Portugal was a microcosm of what America is today, to some degree. So where America is a melting pot of culture, religion, races, everything, cities in that time were a melting pot of the local region. You would come there and live together, and you'd maybe even have people from farther out the region that all lived in much more close proximity and had to get along with these vastly different backgrounds potentially. But in the cities at that time, they were also a bit of a melting pot. And as they came together then, they're thinking about how this city will look in the future is influenced from a lot of these other influences that come to the city with their background and then make a future. And then you have a catastrophe like the earthquake, which kind of cleans the slate. And they're like, hey, we're already kind of here. We had this tragedy, but now we can rebuild with this understanding that how long had Lisbon really been a thriving city up to that point?
It was a pretty thriving medieval city. As kind of a real powerhouse and a major city in Europe, I would say maybe about 150, 200 years.
Okay,
since
so
Portugal
several
took a leading
generations.
role. Yeah, several generations.
Yeah. Okay.
But I think that the story that I'm trying to tell about Lisbon and the story of the U.S. It's in a way the same story, right? And it's a story where cities begin as a project to fixate, right? So you want to fixate power relations. You're doing the wall to literally mean you can't get out if you are forced labor, and you can't get in if you're an invading army, right?
Control.
You know where the palace is. Yeah, it's about control. But in our world, in the modern world, and again, by that I mean the last 200, 250, 300 years, they become places of flux. It's where you go if you want to reinvent yourself, right? So it's a melting pot in the sense that it's bringing lots of people with different backgrounds, but in a way, it sort of melts who the individual is too. Because it matters less who your parents are, right? You don't have assigned roles. You can, at least that's the promise of it, and that's kind of often how it turns out.
It's the young individual from Ohio, Wisconsin, California, boy or girl that moves to Manhattan to make it, and they have to a large degree forget who they were, and not forget, but they take who they were and they see what it can offer in this new testing kind of pot.
Yeah,
if you will.
That's right.
Okay,
it's testing, and you place a bet, and just to add another sort of layer to the connection between Lisbon and the U.S. So one thing, when they redid this Lisbon, the main square, which is still there, you can go see it. They called it Commerce Square. This is a place that used to be called Palace Square, and a place where cathedrals were kind of central, right? So you're now reimagining and redesigning kind of the built world with a whole new set of values. And then the place that really took that to a next level was the grid in Manhattan. Where, for the first time, you look at this plan and you can't tell where the center is or where power is located, right? It doesn't tell you that based on the urban form. It doesn't tell you where the cathedral is going to be, where the church is going to be, So anyway. So it's the same story, really.
Commerce Square became Commerce Square after the earthquake, and before that, it was Cathedral Square. Did you say, or?
No, it was called Palace Square. So it's
Palace
a place it was a seat of royal power, right?
See, that's interesting. This is kind of my I get the moving of commerce and power from a central royal oligarch or whatever kind of control to more individuals having ability to rise closer to that level through commerce. I think that's a good thing overall. Capitalism has its benefits. It has its downsides too. Nothing's clean. But if you look at now what we invest in for our architecture, our public architecture, and our design space, we've continued that trajectory of the commerce down to the big box store. And we don't even have a place where we come together. So America, in some sense, has gone too far with it in a non-progressive direction and isolated a benefit of that process without all the wisdom of the other thing that comes with it as far as the social community aspect. Now it's this commerce. I just drove out to Target, which is 3 miles out of the downtown where I live here in Biddeford to do shopping. I didn't know anyone there, and it didn't contribute to any local businesses, and all the money from the stuff I bought at Target is going to someplace in France So there's a weirdness there that I think generationally there's going to be some kind of correction, I would imagine, but what that looks like, I have no idea. But that's just an interesting kind of squirrel side note there, if you will, that I do think is directly related to this, that there is, as you're outlining, I think positivity and hope in the future, but there's also things that we've allowed in and things that we've gravitated to, like these big box stores through Commerce Square type of thinking that's gone too far.
Yep. Yeah. So, okay, lots there. First, you've said two things that I think are great kind of just truths to live by if you're working as a historian. One, nothing is clean, and the other, there's a weirdness there. Those two things are always true. Whatever you're looking at in history, nothing's clean, there's a weirdness there. So this is a big story in the book, the one that you kind of just outlined. And let me tell you very quickly the way that I tell it. Well, one is, in an aristocratic world, the future's fixed, right? You're born with as a noble, you stay a noble, you're not, you don't. In the bourgeois world, there's more opening, right? You can buy your way into nobility, right? Like operas are part of that. You know, operas used to be by invitation, then they become by subscription, right? So, you know, there's more flux in social class in a capitalist world than in an aristocratic world, right? The story of big boxes, it is a story of capitalism, but it's also a story of government. So it didn't play itself out the same way outside of the US, right? And in the US, it's very much a story of government regulation, right? So you build big boxes and you build sprawl sort of downstream from all sorts of tax codes, building codes, zoning, and of course the car, which is in a way kind of the, you know, most government mandated infrastructure revolution of the modern world, even though that's not how people tend to think of it. That's more or less how it went down.
See, that's it's so interesting to me that that kind of medieval city trajectory. Like you could look at a village in England, Portugal before the earthquake, Portugal after the earthquake, and I would imagine if you go to Portugal now, I haven't been to Portugal. I really want to go. But if you go to Portugal now, I would imagine it still, to our eye, looks like a medieval, like, hey, this is an amazing, quaint city. But for someone from the village in, the medium-sized village in England that's truly medieval, what Portugal would have been before the earthquake, if they were to go to Portugal, they would probably notice and see and experience and feel a drastic difference, kind of the difference of if an American goes to London compared to if an American goes to Columbus, Ohio. That there's a history left, even within the modern living, there's a history still there that carries instruction with it through the living in that city of the value of life, not just the profit of commerce. And in America, we live a very unique thing where we were a completely clean slate after we genocided everyone that was here. So, America is this kind of no rails money grab, I think, to a large degree, but also, an expression of the freedom of being freed from the bonds of that aristocracy kind of, you can't get into our echelon. Well, all right, screw you guys. We're going to go find our own nation and do what we want. It turns out we really embrace capitalism, and now we have box stores. So
yeah. I mean, so I think, look, in history, there's always things that happen a certain way, and we try to get as close to that as we can based on, documents left and so on. But at the same time, we're constantly reinventing our relationship to the past, right? The way that the things that we notice and the way we tell stories about the past is always kind of a reflection of the present and of our own aspirations for the future, right?
Right.
And I say that because, in some sense, you go to Lisbon today, it still has a medieval, very charming, very touristic, the Alfama, sort of going up in the hills, wasn't destroyed by the earthquake. When you go to the area destroyed by the earthquake, it does stand out as this sort of, it's gridded, right? It's sort of cleaner. The architecture is not as ornamental. It's more neoclassical. And so
probably easier
to drive
around.
But this Commerce Square, well, not really, because it's not.
Still
so
not
they
there.
Did design it for fire, but right, it's too early, and the roads were wide for the period, but not for our.
Yeah.
And they're turning some of those into pedestrian. But this Commerce Square, after the World War II, was a huge parking lot. And it's now been reinvented as this sort of very pleasant plaza that tourists and locals gather around and so on. And these things happen all the time, right? So nothing is. We should never think of anything in the future as a given. And I think going back to the past can serve as a reminder of that, right? So the U.S. is today a car country, but not that long ago it was train country, and people in the U.S. thought of France as car country, right? So, in a way, if you look to the past for all of its weirdness and how, nothing is clean, it can sort of remind us how things change things sneak up on us, and they often change quicker than we're able to predict.
Where does that change come just from chance technological innovations that kind of meet a bulging desire or need within a society at the time?
Yeah, I think all of the above. It depends, right?
Yeah.
But I think there's always an element of chance. I mean, so in this book, technological innovations are a big part of it. So are ideas. And it's always, it's hard to know what comes first. I think it often depends on what you're, how you're looking and what you're looking at. One reason that I think, one way in which I think of architecture and design is that, if there's one debate within history about whether it's material conditions or kind of ideas that drive change, architecture and design are always a meeting ground of both, right?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing right now because, just like with the innovation of LED light bulbs, arguably when they first came out, they're really annoying, bad color, blah, blah, blah. They're getting better. They're getting way better. But they're so ingenious with the amount of, less heat and energy consumption. I mean, just amazing. You'll get people arguing, well, the flicker rate and blah, blah, blah. Maybe. I don't know. But, I mean, the innovation with an already existing technology is there to, all right, we have this tech, but now we can, lower our consumption and everything else. And we're in this good trajectory. I don't know where I was going with that because I got sidetracked with what I'm looking at here. But that change that drives, it can either be technological or idea driven. Now, progress, this is kind of the most foundational question I have, and it is tied into this farther back religious or spiritual trajectory. I think spiritual, was a first, and religion came second, obviously. Well, obviously I say that. I think that, obviously. But in suggesting and executing upon progress, how do you get the most beneficial and lasting change while actually getting it to come to fruition? And why I kind of say it in this way is that if you force change, it'll be rejected as soon as the power structure crumbles. Whereas if you inspire change, it will stay no matter who's in power. Currently in the US, we're under a system of shame and duress towards behavior depending on which party's in power. And it's a horrible, horrible situation that is not benefiting our country long term. It kind of goes in 4 to 8 year swings that just make us hate the other side more and more, and lose the trust and the value of the other side in comparison to our own nature. Now, in saying that, what I'm getting at is that progress, I think, has to come with free will. It has to be inspired. If it is forced or under duress, it will be rejected as soon as that force or duress is gone. And so that is my argument with a more progressive agenda that doesn't have the sensitivity to respect the choice of free will, because they feel that the empathy towards the better result, the better climate, the better whatever, is worth trumping, sorry to use the term, trumping, the autonomy and free will of an individual. So to me, that's where the American ideal of freedom of conversation, freedom of speech, freedom of will, to say, all right, I've hated these LED light bulbs and I haven't wanted to use them forever, but now actually they've gotten to a point, and yeah, I get it. And my utility bill is lower now. Oh, and I don't have to worry about the kids leaving the lights on all day. Yes, I want these lights. Rather than, 15 years ago, the 55-year-old guy at that time going like, I hate these lights. They're forcing me. How do we get this better city of the future with free will of individuals, rather than, people on the right are all using these, things like the 15-minute city and everything as a threat and as a Halloween scare tactic, How do we get to the ideas of benefits of these types of things while people can go there of their free will rather than duress or shame?
Yeah. All right. This is so much there. We could keep
inspire
going
us
for
to
a long
good.
time. No, so yeah, okay. Lots there. So, we talked about technologies and ideas driving change. Law, of course, is another major driver, at least in the world as we know it, right? So with LED, sort of mandates for things like LED
Now,
lights.
that's the thing,
yeah.
though, that law can be created and execute free will.
Yeah.
So
right. So it kind of, it's in the details. It depends, right? So one thing that I think progressives have not been sensitive to enough over the last kind of 5-10 years or whatever is the power of backlash, right?
Yeah.
So there
good.
was, and this is kind of in the book, that there were a lot of progressive conversations where people are sort of assuming that we or they have a monopoly on the imagination, right? That fascists aren't imagining things too, that they also don't have desires and want to act on them and so on, right? So, but it really all depends, I think, on the specifics. I think it's very hard to generalize about these things, but we can generalize that the law sometimes feels like the imposition of a will and is something that generates backlash and ends up backfiring. Other times, you mandate something, people hate it, and then things become better and they love it or forget about it. And there's plenty of evidence for that too, right? So I don't know. I remember this study in some town in Spain where there were all these people that opposed bike lanes. They thought they were going to ruin downtown. There's going to be impossible to park and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Then they went ahead and built them and went back to some of the people that most opposed them. And they'd say things like, as soon as I saw my granddaughter biking around, I kind of loved this thing. And now I would never want to go back to what it used to be. It's more silent now. It's more pleasant and so on and so forth.
Right.
So there's plenty of examples to generalize in multiple directions about these things. The generalization that I feel comfortable making after writing this book is that we should never try to be too possessive about the future that we want. As designers, as people who go about the world and so on. So I'm uncomfortable with utopian thought to the extent that it wants to imagine this sort of closed future, right? Where you're changing things for posterity. There's a secular version of that that's authoritarian. There's a religious version of that that's authoritarian. And I think there's a lack of wisdom in the idea of planning for posterity because we never know what's ahead, especially in the world as we've inherited it. One kind of general truth that I've drawn out of my research is that reasonable predictions, as a rule, underestimate the range of reasonable outcomes.
Okay, wait. Let me digest that again. Can you say it again?
Reasonable predictions underestimate the range of possible outcomes.
So okay. So reasonable is based off of previous performance, but we're capable of more than our past performance. Okay.
Let me put it a different way. If I sent you back, or if we sent anyone back in time at any point since the 18th century, definitely since the 1870s, if you send people back 10 years into a room of very smart people and you have them describe, look, this is what's going to happen in the next 5-10 years, they're going to be the first ones to be laughed out of that room, right?
Yeah.
If I send you back to 2008 to tell people, hey, Trump's going to be U.S. president, they're going to laugh at you, right?
Right.
And this is kind of a constant. This is a constant.
But the odd thing is, you could have sent us back to the writers of The Simpsons, and they'd be like, "Yeah, we wrote it."
Yeah, right. They're the exception.
They're the prophets. I don't know what's going on in that writer's room, but good.
Yeah.
Lord.
Well, a lot, right? I mean, when you let your creativity flow like that, you're going to get a lot of things right.
Maybe that's.
So just to then finish, to then kind of just wrap up the answer to how I would answer your question. I mean, at the same time, I think we've sort of seen enough of the human experience in the built, designed environment and world to be able to trust certain things, right? So I think if you give people the option of living in walkable places where it's easier to do things, it's easy to come and go, it's easy to rent, to buy, to in other words, if you have like a variety of kinds of housing stocks, of varieties of kinds of commerce, of places to hang out in, if you do those things, you tend to get good outcomes. You tend to, you build trust among people. You have sort of common denominators that make politics work more smoothly, that make it more fun and more rewarding to live in the city in the modern world and so on, right? And part of the tragedy of the 15-minute city is becoming the sort of victim of, the polarization and so on, is that in a way it's kind of a vehicle for freedom, right? The whole point is that you shouldn't be trapped in a built world where you have to, cross the city in your car and look for parking and become miserable. Like, you should kind of live in a world where you can get out of your house and have access to all of these things that you want to have access to without tons of friction, right? It became something else in this kind of paranoid imagination, like a prison and so on and so forth. But the promise is exactly the opposite, right? It's an engine for free will in a way.
An interesting thing you just pointed out there is that just because we had free will that got us to a point where now we have to go 30 minutes to get something we need, where we feel controlled if someone says 15-minute city. I get that people are overreacting potentially to this 15-minute city thing because of like a lot of what came out of COVID and stuff that, and the polarization of political agendas and everything else currently. But you make a good point that currently you are forced to do because of bad decisions that got us here. Now, my argument would be that if the 15-minute city is a better thing, it will naturally have people gravitate to it because of its goodness, and that when people graduate to it because of its goodness, or gravitate towards it because of its goodness, they won't shut up about how great it is, and they'll live better lives, and that will convince people rather than the limiting of people's potential. Like, no, I want to cut down trees endlessly and burn them, and some people are going to want to do that forever no matter what, and if they want to do that, those are the kind of people where if society falls apart, we'll need them someday anyways. So maybe that's the way.
Well, just go on Zillow and you kind of have your answer to where we are, right? So one, being forced to basically have a car to live in a U.S. city. I mean, that's a design problem, right? We could design how we inhabit space and how we move around in a way that would give you freedom to move around and through other modes of transportation if you so choose. And then if you love cars, that makes it easier too because there are fewer cars on the road, right?
Now the autonomous cars coming online, like in Austin and stuff, that you can just call a car and without a driver it comes and takes you where you need to go. Everybody gets to use that car. That's pretty nice, I'm gonna say.
Yeah, it solves the problem. So from a design perspective, the big problem of cars is that for most of their life cycle, they're stored.
Right.
And and they take up an immense and an insane amount of space in a city, right?
Yeah.
So if fewer cars were stored and more cars were moving all the time, with some kind of autonomous Uber. That's a much more kind of rational system. But let me just very quickly go back. So, the 15-minute city, in other words, like walkable, downtowns and small towns or in cities and so on, they're wildly expensive relative to exurbs, right?
Because people want to live in them.
Right, because people want to live in them.
They're nice.
So, exactly. So my argument is, why not allow people to build that? And you solve a problem for them. People clearly want them, right? So you're meeting their demand for that. It's currently illegal to build that in most of the United States, right? Because of zoning codes and so on. But then you're actually also cutting down fewer trees. Because if you're not if you're not meeting the demand for 15-minute cities, one, they become more exclusive, right? You have to be an heir or you have to have a fabulously high salary in order to be able to afford it. But those that would want to live there and instead have to live on some outer suburb and they're driving in and out, one, they have much higher emissions. But two, you have to build for those people if a city's growing, and then you have to cut trees, right? And sprawling leads to cutting many more trees than apartments. So that's part of the optimistic kind of argument of the book, right? Cities kind of got us in part of our trouble environmentally, but they might be the easiest way to get us out of that without forcing people to do things they don't want to do, which is something that gets us in all kinds of troubles.
It's unavoidable that there's always going to be kind of more hermit, country bumpkin types that just don't want to live close to people. And there's going to be people who want to be in a more culturally vibrant and diverse and active and, something like New York, Boston, Atlanta, Miami, those kind of areas are just alive with culture and differences and everything else. Whereas you can run out in the woods and it's just simply nature and you're by yourself. That's a really valuable thing too. And some people want to live there. Some people want to live there. And that idea of being able to live with less cost overhead in an environment like a 15-minute city and then be able to go out and enjoy that nature and then return to that as an option, I think is just huge and very, very valuable. But I wouldn't want that for the exclusion of the other. I'd always want the ability to I don't want to live in that city. I'm sorry. I got to go cut trees and burn them. Well, all right.
So
we'll offer this better option potentially. You keep us in mind. You have fun.
Not only would I say that that's a false choice, but it's actually the hermit, the person that wants the solitude or wants to be in an environment that's less impacted by humans. The city is a condition for that, unless you want to exterminate hundreds of millions or billions of people. So let's take some cities in East Asia, like even Tokyo, or many cities in Europe. So cities that are more compact than a U.S. city. It's a lot easier to leave the city. It's a lot easier to get to the woods.
The boundaries closer and quicker.
Exactly, right. Because you don't have sort of endlessly sprawling, as compared to Dallas, for example.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, right.
Where
right.
you
so
go
like San
and
Francisco.
you go and you go. Yeah,
it's got water and it sprawls. I get it, but it has water and mountains that do kind of pack it in a bit.
Yeah, I think the geography helps San Francisco in that regard, right? But LA, LA too. I mean, you have mountains there and so on. But but it just
Yeah, that LA basin. It's funny, on the east side of LA, it cuts off immediately on the mountain range, and then on the other side of that, it's desert. Yeah. And everyone gets to just go over the hill, and then you're in the middle of nowhere. And on the north side, Malibu kind of cuts it off before Ventura and all that, which is nice. But yeah, I get what you're saying. That's a good point, that in a more highly dense city, you can be in nature more quickly if done right. And so you then can have that ability back and forth. Yeah, that's interesting.
More. It's more efficient land use. And LA, for the record, by the way, is a fairly compact city for U.S. standards. So if you compare LA to most places in the South and the Midwest, it's actually it is easier to get to nature out of LA than I think in a lot of other.
You can be
places.
like right up against it over in San Bernardino and all that, up against those mountains. Once you get over, it's just like high desert. It's really interesting. I like that area. Okay, so to me, the deepest question is this idea of free will and people coming to it through choice. But the argument also is that, well, if we allowed that in the integration of schools in the 1950s in America, would it have happened, or would we still be in this racist kind of situation, right? So there's always going to be these arguments either way, where sometimes you need a little push from the law to help you realize. I get that. I 100% get that. But I also, get the other side of it, where I don't want to be in any way, shape, or form under duress to have to partake in a 15-minute city if I don't find it to be valuable. And if I find it to be valuable, I want the ability to choose that as well, and if I think it's on this is what I found that I think applies here, in stepping away from religious practice. I found there was a lot in it that I felt was able to be approached critically, but it felt like I was just banging my head against the wall to try and tell people about it. And it was very hard to get anyone else to realize the things that I was seeing. And the only way I could really communicate that was to make a really, really good case. I couldn't just kind of express my frustration to people like, oh, I get it. Yeah, I'm on board with you. You have to make an extremely airtight case to get people to change. And people just simply do not want to change for the most part. And so I think once people see, it's like the sizzle of the steak is what sells it. And I think when people see other people living in these environments that are ultimately more freeing potentially, living in a 15-minute city where, I actually work part-time and have an apartment and I can spend more time in the woods than you who live in the suburbs and think you're living in the woods,
Right.
When it comes to that point, then it's like, oh, I get it. I'm on board, And that's when you have lasting change that doesn't go backwards or get the whiplash or backlash that you're talking about.
Yeah. Right. I mean, I think that there are many sort of all of the above scenarios. I mean, I do think it's important to have as a starting point that change is a given. So even when people resist change, they're still bringing it about, right? So, one, like the 15-minute city, the sort of walkable, compact city, it's illegal, right? So it's not as if anyone's being forced to do that. It's actually the other way around. Right.
Yeah. Current zoning codes wouldn't allow most of it.
It's just
in America,
right.
anyways.
And not just that, but those kinds of places are essentially sort of bankrolling a lifestyle that resents it. Right. Like apartments pay a lot more property taxes per square footage than single-family homes. It's much cheaper to maintain the infrastructure of a city than a sprawling suburb. It's cheaper to distribute infrastructure vertically than horizontally, and so on and so forth, right?
Yep.
But one of the reasons why it is illegal to kind of grow these places or build more places like them is that people living in those places are against it because they love what they have and they don't like change. But in their opposition to change, you're still getting change. So, for example, there's data now on how places like Boston, San Francisco, New York, sort of very desirable, very expensive, have collapsing percentages of families with children because they can't afford it. They're getting older, right? So you might not have change that is discernible that you're seeing because the built environment is the same, but socially it's changing drastically, right? It's more retirees, it's fewer families, it's less dynamic, and so on and so forth. So change. So you're going to get change, always, right? It's just a matter of understanding the trade-offs. If you do this, it's going to change in that way. If you do that, it's going to change in this way, and then figuring out what we as a society or we as individuals, prize the most.
That's an interesting point. That cities are cities actually trending more aged because of kind of rollover wealth, and like where we live in, essentially coastal but rural Maine. When we moved here, it was affordable. It completely was. People would come to visit and they'd be like, why do you live here? This is gross. The town was like an old mill town that just hadn't been gentrified yet. Now it's pretty gentrified. My kids wouldn't be able to afford anything here unless they were pretty wealthy, by the time they're buying. So does that push the development of the 15-minute type of city into more suburban areas where they'll develop potentially? Or do you think there'll be a kind of mass die-off, if you will, within the cities and the property values will plummet and families and stuff will come back in there eventually? Or
I mean, I think it all depends, and it's hard to generalize, right? I mean, what we do know is that if the population's growing, either because of jobs or natural rates and so on, and you're not building more units, property prices will go up and there will be more homelessness, right? People will be left out, right? But it's not just about population growth. It's also about family sizes, right? So you used to have more people living in each unit because families were larger. So now families are smaller. So you actually need more units for the same number of people, right?
Oh, you
so
need
that
more
puts,
bathrooms and kitchens than bedrooms.
or just
per
units, right? If you have like for example, some in Cambridge where I live, you have these sort of Victorian mansions that were built for families of like 7-8 people, right? Or you have small units that rented rooms for different families. So there might have been like 8-10 people there, and now there's a retired couple or a family of 3 and so on, right? So again, same number of people, you need more units just because of how family sizes have changed. So in places that have been building more housing, like Austin, rents go down. You don't have the kinds of issues that I've just described, right?
Right.
I did see this. Nobody quote me on this, but you can Google it and find out where this came from. But and I don't know if it's the median or the average. It was a legit source, but the median or average age of a home buyer in the U.S. I think over the last
wait a minute. Let me
30
guess.
years.
Let me guess. The median homebuyer age on photo shoots, I've been finding that all of the interns that are like early mid-20s, they're all saying like, "Oh, I'm never going to be able to afford a home," and I never heard that until like 2-3 years ago. So I bet your median homebuyer right now is in mid to late 30s, if not early 40s.
So it went from I'm pretty sure these are the numbers. It went from 39 to 59.
Wow.
In like a very short period of time, like 2-3 decades or something like that.
How could you buy a home at 59 and hope you could ever own it? Like,
Well, it's the same people. Like it's people who already own.
oh, they're just buying second homes.
Right. Well, I don't know if we can know based on where the point comes from. Or they're the ones who are selling and buying. They're the ones who can afford it because they built equity by having become homeowners in their 30s or even younger, and nobody can compete with them because it's too expensive.
Wow, interesting. Yeah, I mean, when we moved here to Maine in 2003-ish, we were looking in the 120,000 range. And now that same house that we ended up buying something for like 155, it's worth, I think, around 400. And that was just from 2005 to now. That's kind of crazy, and even when we moved here in 2003-5, forget what it was. I remember when I was in architecture school, I was looking online at like realtor.com for prices, and then I'd search history like back in the late 90s. Stuff was going for like 45,000, and it had doubled just in 5 years at that point. And everyone was making cash offers before the, crash of 2007 and all that. So it's a real odd, not pump and dump, but it's a really odd cycle that we're in with real estate. It feels like they're using real estate and interest rates to keep the economy afloat when they're messing other stuff up. And I don't know if that's a way of supporting your nation off of the housing of your population, or if they're just, milking the population somehow. I'm not an economist, but it is an odd thing that there's just these, massive jumps in this value that kind of price the next generation out continually. And you get the people in those moments that are willing to say, I'm going to take the risk knowing that this is potentially going to keep happening. And if I jump in now and I can hang on with my claws, then by the time maybe I'll be able to flip it and be okay. So that favors the progressive, honestly. Or that really, it's the progressive type. Even if they're like a contractor, you've got to be progressive to say, I'm going to take this risk and hold on to it and sell it later. You're going to be thinking more than saving. You're going to be progressing more than, saving up and buying. Right.
It's sort of a future-oriented, which is a big part of the book, right? The kind of creation of this future-oriented mindset and how much cities, both spiritually and in terms of real estate markets and so on, have to do with that. And I think one lesson you get from looking back is that there are, or have been, since we've embarked in this adventure, this collective and individual adventure, many plausible futures, and I think that remains true today. It's just
It's
many possible
funny.
futures that are in contradiction to each other, right?
Yeah, are your parents still alive? Personal question, I guess. But
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I mean, so you look like you're probably 40-ish, maybe somewhere in that range.
Just turned 44.
44. Okay,
Last
you're
week.
not too far behind me. When I talk to my parents about how tumultuous their college life was in late 60s, early 70s, and I look at now, they kind of are like, you really don't understand what it was like back then. Like, it was extremely. There was an upheaval. There was a liberal use of things like the CIA, the Vietnam War, like racial tensions. There was a lot going on back then that felt like the edge. I mean, we almost did nuke ourselves into oblivion were it not for a Russian officer that was like, no, I don't think this is right. We're not pushing the button in a sub off of Cuba somewhere, I think is what the story is. But, it seems like generationally we go through these upheavals that we could have had all, like you said, all these different potential futures. And luckily we kind of keep reining it in, but each generation, depending on your age, you feel like, holy cow, this is going off the rails. This is crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, my parents went through this in their college years, and I'm sure they felt it when they were my age in probably the 80s and 90s to some degree, but we were kind of in a steady state at that point. But now we're a little bit more tumultuous. But all these different futures. I hope that with AI and technology is only going to get turbocharged by AI. And the implementation of that within the way we make a living, the way we interact with spirituality, religion, community, cities, commerce, economies, and everything else with AI and technology is, I think we're coming at an inflection point where life as we've known it for the last probably, 1,000 years of work to survive. I think that thing is going to be the thing that turns. I think there's the potential for high wealth across the board if we just don't mess it all up and become overly greedy. But there's always those who are, when we were in that aristocratic point or that, royal point, whatever I forget how you refer to it. But, at that point we were, serfs or whatever, looking at the nobility. It's like, we'll never get there. There's this higher level of control that keeps us here and there's no hope. It could feel that way back then, but we're here now, aren't we? And we're way more powerful and capable than the royals were back then. But we haven't lost the royals. They're just at different levels. They're at Bill Gates levels and stuff like that now. And it kind of feels like we'll never get to their level. But I think we are coming close to a point where these type of cities, 15-minute cities, the line, and the ability for not having to strive and stress yourself out to the nth degree to just be able to survive, you can feel the difference. In America, it's sink or swim much more so than it is in Canada. If I go up to Halifax, people are slower in that they go around slower and they interact with you more slowly. I don't mean that as in they're dull. I mean that as in they have more emotional headspace to just say, hey, stranger, how you doing? And they'll just sit there and look at you like you're actually going to respond, and not just give them the finger and drive off because they're in the way and you got to get to, and you got to finish and you got to do. In America, you have to do that. And if you don't, you're not going to be able to afford a place to live, and you'll be on the side of the street with a sign. But in these other countries where, education, healthcare, and all that, it's a little more padded or provided, there's a different atmosphere, there's a different culture that is noticeable to some degree, even in the similarity between America and Canada. Which I think, these ideas of the future city, they lead towards more of that. But they also have this Machiavellian kind of weirdness that happened over COVID mixed in, which I cannot deny was there. So I'm on both sides of this weird thing, knowing that there's a middle line in here somewhere that is truly beneficial, and hopefully through something like the hope of the future within cities that you're hopefully outlining here is possible.
Yeah. So there's I mean, this has been great, and let me just react to some of what you said. I mean, I think as a scholar, I think my job is to understand, right? And I think that we need to understand where some of the paranoia with 15-minute cities is coming from and so on, and how it's often coming from a very legitimate concerns, right? And a lot of them have to do with people's experiences of COVID. And so on. This slowness made me think of a line from a novel, Magnificent Ambersons, that Orson Welles turned into a movie. That's something like, the faster we can move around, the less time we have to spare.
Oh, so
and I think
true.
we're living through that, with the speed of communication technology, right? Like emails and the internet has, sped us up in a way that
Can you
probably,
say that Orson Welles quote again?
Yeah, it's something like, the faster we move around, the less time we have to spare. And he's thinking of cars and streetcars and so on, relative
so
to
true.
walking or the horse or whatever. But I think it's true for how we're living with the internet too. I mean, a big problem not that long ago, in the 19th century and even in the 20th century was the problem of boredom. We've automated labor. We have a lot more time. I know, right? And it seems insane. It's like we're all craving boredom, right? Because we don't have time to spare. So just back to your parents and this kind of arc that we've touched on here. I have a colleague who likes to say that the reason to study history is to give us a sharper sense of what's new in the present.
Say that again?
The one reason to study history is to get a sharper sense of what's new in our world, right? In other words, not to be swayed by something that we're like, this has never happened before, and actually there's a lot of continuity there, and then you kind of don't really understand what's happening, right?
Right.
I think history it's always an interplay between continuity and rupture. The experience of rupture, the experience of tumultuous times has been a constant in the modern world, right? It's basically almost always felt tumultuous.
Do you think tech pressurizes that or relieves the pressure?
It depends. I think
what?
It depends on how you approach it, on how people approach it. It depends on how clear the sources of tumultuousness
I think
are.
I think that pressure results from either the respect of free will or the duress of will. And if you force it, you cause pressure. And if you inspire it, you relieve pressure. I think if I were drawing a math equation of the social dynamics towards progression, I would put those as symbols in there somehow.
Yeah, though I mean, no, I hear you, but at the same time, I mean, a lot of the experience of modernity, and this is something Marshall Berman puts it in these terms. It's sort of maelstrom. It's coming to terms with the limits of free will, the limits of understanding. Like we can't even understand, these technologies that we're using right now. We don't know how these things work, right? Whereas 800 years ago, you actually understand how you're making bread, right? So part of the experience of tumultuousness is basically relinquishing your ability to control your own destiny, right? And some of these ruptures, like the car or the AI, some of these things, we just kind of get swept along. Now, what I will say is new. So there's a continuity in this sort of experience, even though the particulars feel very different. There is something to your parents' generation that I think was new in the human experience, which was the ability to envision the end of the world without resorting to religion, right? So people always thought of the end of the world, but it was preordained.
We can end it now.
Exactly. That's new,
Yeah.
right? The atomic bomb, that's new. Like, you don't have to be, you can be an atheist.
Yeah.
This is not preordained. This is not part of some cosmic cycle.
Good
we can
point.
now And that generates a sort of a kind of anxiety that I think is new, right? It adds a flavor
Collective
to that
anxiety that
tumultuous-
we can agree
collective.
on.
And yeah, the whole planet could go.
We're not
you know,
arguing on that. Yeah.
and that's kind of true of climate change too, right? Obviously, a lot of people don't believe in climate change.
Yeah, but I mean, we all know we could blow it up because we've seen it. The hard
With
thing
the
with
atomic
climate
bomb.
change, yeah. The hard thing
Is
with
the
climate
slowness.
change is it's an idea that we can't, like, just, there it is, you know?
Exactly, it's very different. It's not a
Yeah.
you know, it's not a bomb, right?
Yeah.
It's slower. It's very hard to even
Gets the
have a
frog
full
in the water
understanding
getting
of
boiled.
how it's impacting. It's a whole different temporality.
Yeah.
And it's temporality that's largely, you know, not human, you know, like the changing alkalinity of the ocean, right? That's not something that you experience, right?
Yeah,
Even though
yeah.
it's something that's happening.
Well,
So I think it
I
introduces
surf
a
a lot,
whole
so
different set of problems. Yeah, but you know, you're not
Yeah.
like, you know, yeah.
I can't tell, but
Right, exactly. Yeah.
huh.
Right, but if you're, you know, some creatures in the ocean that then, you know,
Yeah. If
or
our
at least over
oxygen,
generations, right? That's gonna impact your
right?
your
Like, so if
conditions.
I go to Denver, I can feel the oxygen switch, but I can't feel the alkalinity switch in the ocean.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But
Well, like if
alkalinity
you
switch-
dive, right? Like if you dive all the time, you're gonna, you know, obviously people are noticing these changes, in their daily lives and so on. But again, you don't experience them as a whole as you did the atomic threat, right?
Right. Boy, that's a really interesting observation that previously the end of the world was a spiritual religious projection of a deity primarily getting upset with its creation, whereas now the creation realizes we've created enough that we can end it all with just what we've created. And that is a realization that no one can really argue. Like we could, that's a real existential anxiety that is amazing. We haven't ruined ourselves yet, which I'm very happy we haven't. So
Yeah.
rough one.
No.
Let's keep that up. Let's keep not destroying ourselves. That's a good thing to keep doing. But Bruno, I've really appreciated. Like it seems like you have a mind as curious as mine, but one that's probably far more educated in what you're dealing with, and it's really interesting to be able to talk to someone who seems like on the same wavelength, but more information to actually make that wavelength pretty accurate of reality.
You know, I've been writing a book, so
well, I find
I've had
this
to learn a thing or two.
I find this with every author that I talk to is that when you've had to organize so much into a book, you've just processed everything through your experience, and you have it all at your fingertips to actually be able to communicate, and that's really a pleasure to be able to kind of go back and forth.
So I'll say, I know we have to end, but I'll say from my standpoint, well, first, yeah, it's been a huge pleasure, and thank you so much for having me. From my standpoint, it's almost the other way around. So I tend to, once I'm done with writing things, you know, I'm done, it's off my hands, it now belongs to readers. So for me, it's an experience of like letting go of all these things that I had on my fingertip for a long time. So now when I talk about it, now when I dip back into the book, I'm like, oh my gosh, I completely forgot all of this stuff. Like at some point, this was really with me and present, which makes it for a better experience. Because sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, this is pretty good. This is a pretty good story I managed to tell here. But I could never do it now because I've moved on to different topics and, you know, different concerns.
That's funny. It's kind of like when you learn something, you get it. But then when you teach it, you get it in a different way. And it seems like you kind of went through the process of writing it, but then when you share and like deal with other people's ideas that are inaccurate or accurate or like but yeah, and that's just I also find that my experience in listening to a lecture is very different than my experience listening to someone ignorant like myself speak to someone who's educated where both people are open and curious, because then we have the educated person, you, able to inform the uneducated curiosity, which fits the puzzle piece of all the listeners, which it's kind of like having a guide of curiosity and ignorance, exploring someone else's well-informed curiosity. That's how I paint podcasting.
Everybody's educated. It's just different,
Yeah.
in different worlds, right? But that's the beauty of conversation, right?
I love it.
You get to share,
Yeah,
it's always a meeting of different educational kind of worlds, right?
Yeah, and I really do think that as much flack as you can throw at people pontificating on podcasts and everything else, I do think it is the antidote to the trite and harmful side of the high connectivity that we now have. There's always a positive and minus. It's messy, it's dirty, and it's never clear. Yeah. Podcasting is for the most part a much deeper, longer form ability to get into subjects rather than another reel.
Yeah.
So I think we're all doing our part to outline truth as much as possible, so there's a reliable, positive future, and I think that's what these kind of things are great for. So, Bruno, thank you so much for taking the time. Are you in Cambridge, Massachusetts? Or England?
I am.
Oh, okay. If you ever find yourself coming through Maine or anything, look me up, and whenever you want to have another conversation, that'd be great, either online or if you can come by in person. We're just an hour and a half north of you. So if you want to, go and see Maine and discuss something else, please let me know. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you. And talking in person. That sounds great. Is even more fun because you don't have that delay, and I can interrupt you even more if you're here. So. Anyways,
and likewise, let me know if you're in the Boston area. It would be a pleasure.
I'm down there all the time for work and stuff, but I really appreciate the time, and let's do this again sometime. Really appreciate it. Where can people find more about you, what you're doing, and the book?
The book is, you can pre-order it. It's on the Princeton University Press website. It's on Amazon, wherever you find books.
Awesome.
And I'd be happy to hear from anyone that has read it, that wants to talk about some of the ideas. Feel free to send me an email.
Do you have a way that people should get in contact with you if
they can Google.
You probably don't want to put your private email or anything on there, but if you have a public way that you.
If you put my name and Harvard, you'll find me.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay. Do you know, let's see, Fiery Cushman?
I do.
We interviewed him. Jeez. He was a great interview. We were doing a documentary on faith that I still haven't finished. And we interviewed him almost 10 years ago now. And he was a really interesting interview. He had a lot to say about social change and progress over time, and foothills, going up foothills, down into valleys to get back up to the peak. And it was a really, really interesting conversation. I have to get that edited and put out someday. But if you see him, he will not remember me, but say, hey, some guy that interviewed me.
I will. No, Fiery's great. I will definitely mention it. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, Bruno what's the H? Is it an I?
Carvalho.
Okay, where are you from? Portugal or?
I'm from Brazil.
Brazil. Okay, yeah. So Portuguese. All right.
Carvalho, but Bruno. Just Bruno is good.
Carvalho. Okay, cool. Bruno, thank you so much. Really appreciate it, and look forward to speaking to you again sometime. Thank you.
Thank you, Trent. It's been a pleasure. Until next time.